Episode 12, Haunted Tunnels of Appalachia. Hey y'all, I'm Heather and this is Poison Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. As always, thanks for listening. Over halfway through Spooky Month, which makes me kind of sad. But Christmas is coming up next and I love Christmas. Just don't know if I'll be able to do many holiday-themed episodes. But I have at least one in mind. But let's continue with Spooky Month for now. My friend Lena suggested this idea to me. She mentioned Moonville Tunnel because that's our big local legend. But she also mentioned that other tunnels in Appalachia are haunted, so I'm going to do this episode on haunted railroad tunnels and other tunnels in Appalachia. Which there are quite a few, actually, so I got this train going down the track. I know, I'm corny. Moonville Tunnel, let's start with that. It's the most local one to me, or at least most popular one near me. Geographically speaking, I may be closer to some in West Virginia, but Moonville Tunnel is the one I know the most about. And you should always lead with something you know about, correct? In the mid-1800s, the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad was pushing through the southeastern Ohio to reach Cincinnati. Along its route, and in more remote sections were the towns of Zaleski, Hope Furnace Station, Ingham Station, and King Station. Central to these small coal mining towns was a small community mainly made up of two families, the Coes and Fergusons. It was called Moonville. Nearby, the railroad company built two trestles over the winding Raccoon Creek and gouged a tunnel called Moonville Tunnel through one high hill. Walking the tracks is incredibly dangerous and was made even more hazardous by the trestles and tunnel. One trestle stood over Raccoon Creek less than 50 yards away from the tunnel mouth. Over 21 people were killed on or near the tracks here. The last fatality was reportedly in 1978 when a 13-year-old girl fell off the trestle as a train passed over. So that's not too far from us in time. But let's go back a little bit in time. By the turn of the century, the coal mines were slowly starting to be used up and closed down. The last family left the town in 1947. By then, the town itself was abandoned. By the 1960s, all the tunnels were gone and there was little to mark the site other than Moonville Cemetery, the tunnel, and foundation stones near the track. From the Moonville Tunnel website, moonvilletunnel.net, it says, Moonville was originally a small mining and railroad community with only a couple families residing in the town proper. However, it was part of a much bigger picture due to its location in an area with limited roads and the presence of a railway. The town became interconnected with other communities along the train route. Both miners and their families utilized the railway as a means of traveling from one town to the next, solidifying Moonville's role in the larger network of towns along the railroad. Just outside town, the railroad forged a path through a large hill and put a tunnel known as Moonville Tunnel, for the way the moon shines over the hillside on certain nights. The number of trains going both eastbound and westbound on a single track, rock falls and sheer walls, and people using the tracks as a path because of the lack of roads made for many deaths. And though those many deaths made for many ghosts. The ghosts all have names. Well, some of them have names, I guess, the ones I'm going to cover. And it kind of reminds me of the movie 13 Ghosts. Well, not really, but, it kind of brings that movie to mind. You'll see what I'm talking about, if you know that movie. The Engineer. The ghost of Theodore Lawhead, an engineer for the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad Company, began to haunt the tracks after his train collided head-on with an oncoming train in the 1880s. Visitors have seen a ghostly figure holding a lantern while walking alongside the track and through the tunnel. And that's the ghost I've heard about the most. The Brakeman. The brakeman is believed to be the ghost of a drunken young man who was working on a train as a brakeman. The young man had consumed too much liquor one night and fell asleep on the tracks. The story goes that around 1859, a brakeman for the railway fell asleep, and sometime during the night he was awakened by the sound of his train leaving the depot. He arose stumbling on the track and falling beneath the wheels of the train. The brakeman never recovered from his injuries, and the ghost of the man is said to be stumbling down the tracks within the tunnel with a lantern in his hand, still trying to catch the train before it leaves Moonville Station. The Lavender Lady. Visitors of the Moonville Tunnel have seen this thin, elderly woman walking alongside the trail. Shortly after, she disappears and the scent of lavender fills the air. It's believed to be Mary Shea, who was killed on the tracks at the far end of the tunnel. She was walking along one of the tracks and did not hear the train and was killed. She must have been wearing perfume when it happened. Folks smell lavender where she died, and her ghost is seen walking the trestles of the tunnel. When I read The Lavender Lady, I was thinking it was a purple apparition, not a fragrant one. But I do know that you can always smell smells sometimes, and you always wonder, is that a ghost? The bully. The bully is believed to be the ghost of Baldy Keaton. Baldy Keaton was a resident of Moonville. The legend says that Baldy was a man that liked to fight when he got drunk. The legend also says that one of Baldy's tactics was to bear hug his opponent. When Baldy was at the saloon, he decided to fight, and a group of men kicked Baldy out. Later, he was found dead on the tracks. Many believe it was murder. The legend now says that the ghost of Baldy Keaton stands above the tunnel and stares at the approaching visitors. He will sometimes throw pebbles. The legend of the bully was also told by mothers to their children, and the mothers also used to tell their children to not stay out at night, or else the bully would get them. Moonville Tunnel was added to the U.S. National Park Service National Register of Historic Places in 2021. The historic Moonville Tunnel and nearby Kings Hollow Tunnel are part of the 10-mile Moonville Rail Trail. I think it's like a bike trail or walking trail. I've never actually been up there. It's just like everything else, it's one of those things I've always meant to do, but I've never done it yet. I'm big talk, but I don't ever do anything. And then let's go to Kings Hollow Tunnel, which isn't too far away. It has a spooky story too. The body of a 24-year-old Pleasant Dexter was found at the west end of the tunnel on May 4th, 1927. Residents believe that Dexter had gone to sleep next to the track, or on the track, and was killed by one of the 3 trains that passed through the tunnel that night. Dexter's skull was fractured, and his body had numerous bruises and fractures. It's supposedly haunted by an 8-foot ghost, so I don't know if that's Dexter or something else, but I really couldn't find much about that. Side note, it's weird that someone is measuring ghosts' height. I mean, 8-foot tall ghost sounds kind of scary, but I really don't know how tall ghosts are, so who knows. King's Tunnel is actually a wooden tunnel supported by wood rather than stone, which I've seen pictures of it, and it's really cool looking. I don't know if I would go in a wooden tunnel, but it looks really sturdy. You should definitely check it out if you go to check Moonville out. Definitely make the extra trip there to see Kings Hollow's tunnel. Now let's head over to West Virginia. There's quite a few haunted tunnels over there. We'll start with Silver Run Tunnel number 19 in Ritchie County, West Virginia. It's along the Northman Rail Trail. It used to be part of the Baltimore and Ohio tracks, starting in Grafton and heading towards Clarksburg and then Parkersburg. The railroad was sold in the 1980s, and construction of recreation trails we know it now began. The trail stretches 72 miles and has 10 tunnels. This tunnel in this legend is known as Tunnel 19. The tunnel is 1,376 feet long. Locals say the tunnel is almost permanently damp and foggy. There's a lady in white that is often seen. I found 2 different stories about her. The legend of the lady in the white dress goes that she was a bride who was riding on a train with her groom, and she either was pushed or fell from the train and died. Train engineers would often see her standing in or beside the tunnel. The other story I read says when the engineer got near the short stretch of railway to the entrance of the Tunnel 19, in the light of the moon and headlights, he saw a dark-haired woman in a white dress walking by the tracks. Horrified he would hit her, he tried desperately to stop the train, throwing the brakes into emergency, who could not stop in time. The engineer would later report to the watchman at the Smithburg Tunnel, about 36 miles west, that he and the firemen jumped from the train, but they never found a body. As rumors about the ghostly woman made their way through the rail yards, another engineer by the name of O'Flannery scoffed at the tale and swore if he saw the woman at Tunnel 19, he would drive right through her. On one foggy night, she was there on the tracks as if waiting for the disbeliever. O'Flannery was good to his word and did not break. He was quite smug about it until he got to Parkersburg, and the news of the telegraphers along the route were reporting a young woman in a pale white gown and golden slippers had been riding his cowcatcher the entire trip. I couldn't get clear if she was dead or a ghost that was riding the cowcatcher, but railmen would recall seeing the ghostly woman on the tracks and hear her moans when they drove through Tunnel 19. I read that she is now known as the Phantom of Silver Run, which kind of reminds me of a Scooby-Doo episode. Next in West Virginia is the Dingus Tunnel in Mingo County, West Virginia. Dingus Tunnel is located on County Road 35 in Mingo County. The tunnel was built in 1892 as part of the Norfolk and Western Railway's 12-pole line. It is 3,331 feet long. The 12-pole line was never profitable, and a new line was built over the Big Sandy River. At this point, the 12-pole line was abandoned, and the State Road Commission converted the line and tunnel into a roadway. Dingus Tunnel is eligible for the National Historic Register of Historic Places for its engineering significance and because it improved access and transportation of goods and people into the region. The railway brought in many Chinese and African American workers to construct the tunnel, and along with them came their families to the area of the 12-Pole Creek. The locals didn't take kindly to the influx of foreign people, and this lack of tolerance resulted in a history of abuse and murder. According to several stories, bands of angry locals would wait at the entrance and exit of the tunnel with guns and would pick off anyone that did not fit their target description. While no official records exist, it's estimated hundreds of victims were killed in this ambush-style murder. The crime against outsiders has certainly contributed to the county's name, Bloody Mingo. In 1898, a fatal train wreck in the tunnel killed 7 people. And then in 1905, a head-on collision occurred between a fully loaded freight train and a work train, which resulted in the deaths of 3 people. By 1913, the tunnel was inactive for rail traffic, and folks began traveling through the tunnel by horses, buggies, and later cars. The rail line was torn up, and new road deck was paved through the nearly mile-long tunnel. The tunnel is still used today. It's a single lane and is one of the main ways in and out of Dingus. I couldn't find any specific stories of a haunting, but definitely it has a dark history. And if a place were to be haunted, I would think it would be that one. Hempfield Tunnel, also known as Tunnel Green in Ohio County in Wheeling. This was built in 1857 as part of the Hempfield Railroad, an ambitious project aimed at connecting Greensburg, Pennsylvania to Wheeling, West Virginia. During the construction, the city of Wheeling granted the railroad company the right-of-way. Authorities decided that the most easily accessible route for the tracks would be straight through a tongue of land where an old town cemetery, Peninsula Cemetery, was located. It was on a hill that spread downward to an uneven bottomland. After convening, those involved determined that the tunnel beneath the cemetery would not impact the dead above. Of course, the living authorities did not ask the dead buried with their opinions on a move. The railway company built the tracks through Wheeling, which included a tunnel forged through the hill beside the cemetery. Like, why would you ever dig through a cemetery? That's just asking for bad juju, I think. A murderer known as the Hatchet Slayer, named Joseph Eisel, killed several people on a killing spree. One of his victims was Alois Ulrich. I'm not sure how the name's pronounced. It's Alois. Alois? Eisel had taken 10 days to arrange his close friend Alois Ulrich, a new immigrant, to join him in the work in Wheeling. Ulrich was murdered inside Hempfield Tunnel, killed with blows to his temple, arms, and fingers. Then he was dragged to the far end and concealed in a culvert near the east mouth of the tunnel. His date of death was estimated as June 29, 1867. Before his execution, Eisel wrote a book, Life and Crimes of Joseph Eisel, alias John Schaefer, the Parkersburg murderer, published for the benefit of his wife and child, describing his murder spree and himself in great detail. Alois Ulrich's ghost is who haunts the interior of Hempfield Tunnel in Wheeling, because it wasn't long after the body that was found in the culvert when travelers taking the shortcut through Hempfield Tunnel began hearing what could only be described as deep groans and cries of a man begging for mercy. Then, directly over the area where Ulrich had been murdered, a ghastly form emerged in the ceiling, swathed in green slime, certainly gathered from the dead patrons left in the cemetery above, and his own rotten flesh. His arm was extended with bloody fingers hanging half severed from the stems. The forefinger of the other hand was pointing desperately at the temple where a huge gash lay, fresh but with dark clotted blood. A guttural groan was slipped from the throat, telling those who would hear, "Let the dead rest." Then the ghost would sail away. Now that's a scary ghost to me. Like, it's just so gruesome and gross. I guess if I was a ghost, I'd want to be like that. I mean, you might as well give people a good scaring, I guess. But the tunnel's dark history and alleged ghost sightings make it a fascinating and creepy spot that attracts visitors from all over the world. Now the tracks are gone, and the area has become one of the Wheeling Heritage Trails, the Wheeling Circle Creek Trail, which runs along the former rail line through Hempfield Tunnel. Now, I did read an article from 2024 that said it was closed for repairs. So I would definitely check that out before I went, if you were wanting to check it out. Also, I read more about the Hatchet Slayer. I want to read more about the Hatchet Slayer. If I find enough information on him, I may do an upcoming episode of him. He sounds pretty interesting. Eaton Tunnel. Eaton Tunnel goes back to the area of the Silver Run Tunnel. Maybe I should have did these together, but I didn't, so you're getting it now. Eaton Tunnel is also known as the Lost Tunnel. It was on the same railroad track as the Silver Run Tunnel. This branch, known as the Parkersburg Branch, had 23 tunnels. Those 23 tunnels had to be built by workers, and many didn't make it out alive. Eaton Tunnel was also known as Tunnel 21, and it was actually bypassed by a new tunnel in 1963. The tunnels were all too small for the new trains, so they just bypassed it by building a new one. The tunnel had collapsed some, and you can't go through it. In the early 1960s, work began on tunnels widening and raising the roofs. Eaton's Tunnel was originally built in 1867, collapsed on June 6, 1963, burying 2 workers. One was rescued safely, but the other died of his injuries, while the body of the second worker was never recovered. The old tunnel was deemed unsafe to continue and was sealed off. A new tunnel was dug parallel to the old. There's no marker commemorating the still buried worker. The tunnel has become a place visited by ghost hunters. But this wasn't the first death. There were several over the years. The first death occurred at the tunnel in 1869 when Thomas Nashville Johnson was killed in a collapse at the tunnel. Then on June 30th, 1950, a westbound mail train entered the east portal of the tunnel at 48 miles per hour, which exceeded the 45 mile per hour limit for this section of the line. There were 2 locomotives and 16 cars of various types, including coach, baggage, and refrigerator express cars. Upon entering the tunnel, the engineer of the lead locomotive heard a sound indicative of a broken rail, and the train began to derail before the brakes could be applied. Both locomotives derailed to the right, moving along the north wall of the tunnel, and derailed to the right after exiting the west portal. Both locomotives sustained considerable damage, as did the first 3 cars. The north wall of the tunnel was heavily damaged and the track inside destroyed. The engineer in the second locomotive was killed, and the engineer and fireman in the lead locomotive sustained injuries. All equipment was determined to be in good order at the time of the accident. The Interstate Commerce Commission concluded that the derailment was attributed solely to a broken rail. And maybe his speed, since he was speeding? I don't know. The new tunnel was built close by, and the old tunnel is a lost tunnel. It's not surprising that people report hearing ghostly voices inside the newer Eaton Tunnel, number 21, next to the old. Some have heard a woman's soft voice calling, "Help me." Others hear men talking as if they're in a large group working their way through the tunnel. The new tunnel is no longer in use either, as the railway is no longer there, and it has partially collapsed. So you can check it out, but you're not going to really see that much because you can't go into it very far. Brandy Gap Tunnel number 2, also known as the Flindration Tunnel, is in Harrison County, West Virginia. The tunnel is an abandoned train tunnel, now part of the North Bend Rail Trail, just outside of Salem. The tunnel was completed around 1857 under a cemetery that dates back to the 1700s. Again with the cemeteries. Won't they learn? It was shut down in the 1980s. Since its closure, people have reported hearing trains decades after the railroad was shut down and seeing orbs while walking through. Legends said that a railroad worker was hit by a train and killed in a tunnel, but very little information is available about the accident and it's not verifiable. Supposedly, the woman in white story that's associated with the Silver Run Tunnel came from the Flindration Tunnel. What happened was she got hit by a train when she was coming up to meet her husband when he got off work. Her husband had not survived the workday, so the train hadn't planned to stop. It caught her on the cow catcher and dragged her all the way to Parkersburg. So that's why you'll have so many accounts of stories of women in white along the North Bend rail trail, because the body was dragged all the way from Flindration to Parkersburg. It's not known if she fell or if she jumped to her death. There are also rumors of violence committed by the Ku Klux Klan in the abandoned tunnel in the early 1900s that potentially contributed to the paranormal activity of general sense of unease, although there is a lack of documentation. Another legend says a train unexpectedly ran through the tunnel and caught workers off guard. One couldn't make it into the several alcoves carved out of the tunnels in the time, so he was killed. People have heard weird noises and seen train lights. They've heard a group of men talking. I couldn't find why it's called two different names, but that's Appalachia for you. The real name and the name they call it. A friend of mine said that she's actually been there and it's really spooky. So if you're in the area, definitely check it out. But let's move on to the state of Virginia. The Blue Ridge Tunnel, also known as the Crozet Tunnel, in Rockfish Gap, Virginia. The tunnel was built by slaves and Irish immigrants who dug from both ends until they eventually met in the middle. Digging was done completely by hand as dynamite had not been integrated as a technique yet. It took over 8 years to construct and took many lives during the process. It was also rumored during the Civil War that soldiers secretly used it during their travels. It's a big tunnel. At the time of its completion in 1858, it was the longest railroad tunnel in the world and measured 4,273 feet, which is pretty close to a mile. Not quite, but it's a pretty long tunnel. Not only did many people die building it, there's also a tragic story involving a pretty 18-year-old woman named Virginia Roncalli who panicked inside the tunnel with horrible consequences over 100 years ago. In 1910, a train stopped inside the tunnel. The tunnel was not well ventilated, requiring train passengers to keep the windows closed while passing through to prevent smoke from entering the cars. Apparently not understanding the conductor's instructions to keep their windows shut, smoke entered the car, awakening the passengers. Thinking the train was on fire, they threw open the windows, filling the car with even more smoke. A general stampede followed in the crowded coach among the widely excited foreigners, some of whom attempted to make their exit and finding the front door fastened. They began breaking windows then. There was a rush to the back door of the car, and for some reason, Virginia was the only passenger to get the door open. She leapt from the car and dropped down between the vestibule of the express car and the moving train and was instantly killed under the wheels. People claim to hear voices in trains and brakes and see spirits, some with menacing vibes there. Which I'm sure that Virginia is probably one of those. Poorhouse Road Tunnel, Rockbridge County. This one is in Lexington, Virginia. Poorhouse Road Tunnel, as formerly known as the B&O Tunnel, was built in the late 1800s. It's located along the B&O Railroad that connected Lexington, Virginia to Staunton, Virginia. It's found off of a beaten path in the middle of the woods on a street called Poorhouse Road. Located in a dense forest, this tunnel is an eerie sight with overgrown vines and graffitied stone walls. Poorhouse Road Tunnel is not your ordinary haunt. A small creek runs along the side of the tunnel, and the noise from it creates a loud echo throughout. Multiple spirits are said to haunt Poorhouse Tunnel. The most well-known of these that lurk in the darkness of the tunnel are the ghosts of two little girls. It's rumored that these two girls were playing off in the neighboring woods, and an unknown man shot and killed them. It's said that you can hear them say, come on, luring people in the tunnel. Also, a woman who was raped and murdered there. Other cases of paranormal activity in the tunnel include a mysterious fog surrounding the middle and shadowy figures that have been spotted nearby. Poorhouse Road Tunnel was reportedly used to be the site of many lynchings and other horrendous murders, so definitely full of bad vibes and definitely probably haunted. Big Bull Tunnel in Wise County, Virginia. Big Bull Tunnel was built sometime in the late 1870s or 1880s. Construction was so problematic and many mishaps followed that many suspected the structure was cursed. Rumors claim that while it's a forgotten haunted location, it remains as paranormally active as it was then. That's hard to say. Tunnel construction took 3 years, much longer than anticipated for the 1,700-foot long tunnel. Early construction was just underway when the rock slides started, and a few open spaces flooded. The tunnel is on the lowest ground within a large ravine that drops into Russell Creek. The terrain issues were enigmas to the builders. Engineers thoroughly examined the ground prior to construction. Over the years, the tunnel kept caving in and needing rebuilt many times, which led to several deaths. Families who lived near the tunnel suspected it was haunted for years. But in 1905, during an inspection, flagman John Peary entered the tunnel for the first round of inspection. Peary fled the tunnel. He claimed he heard sounds that weren't human or animal. He believed they were unearthly. Many people have heard sounds in the tunnel that couldn't be explained throughout the years. Rumors of the wreck of the John Robinson Circus train inside the Big Bull Tunnel in the 1940s. The legend said that all the monkeys died from smoke inhalation. The story ran all the way to Billboard magazine, but no evidence exists to support this legend. So, who knows if it ever happened. Today, the tunnel is still used and still suspected of being haunted. Hikers visit the structure, but should be warned the tunnel is on private property and trains still pass through. Church Hill Tunnel, Richmond. So Richmond isn't quite in Appalachia, but it's close enough. So I thought I would include this one because it's an interesting one. Built in the 1870s as a Chesapeake and Ohio Railway tunnel, the landmark has been associated with tragedy and ruin. Here's more on the haunted church tunnel, which still exists today and has been blocked off for safety reasons. The haunted train tunnel is definitely one of the most haunted places in Virginia. It's in the building of the tunnel workers dealt... Sorry, I messed that up. In the building of the tunnel, workers dealt with blue marl clay, shrink-swell soil, which was notorious for shifting during rainfall. 10 lives were lost to cave-ins before the tunnel was even completed. On October 2nd, 1925, the tunnel unexpectedly collapsed as a work train was passing through. 4 men were killed and a locomotive was trapped inside the tunnel. Rescue efforts were made, although they seemed to only aggravate the collapse. For safety reasons, the tunnel was sealed off permanently in 1926. It says it's even associated with the fabled Richmond vampire, which I might have to check that out too and see what that is. Around the tunnel, hearing the slight whistle of a locomotive underneath the ground and light screams that could possibly be the souls of the people that were trapped inside the tunnel. Apparently, there's a lot of supernatural activity that happens around the tunnel entrance and exit in October. Some witnesses have even seen a man trying to get in or come out of the tunnel, perhaps to try and save the locomotive. So that's all of Virginia. Let's move on to Tennessee. The Sensabaugh Tunnel. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The Sensabaugh Tunnel was built by Edward Sensabaugh in the 1920s in Kingsport, Tennessee. The name was attached to a drive-through tunnel off of Sensabaugh Hollow Road. However, the original tunnel sits on the Big Elm Road to the south. This tunnel has been called the Big Elm Tunnel or the Click Tunnel also. Long forgotten in a state of disarray, the tunnel is no longer passable with a vehicle, but sits vacant on the side of a narrow road. But as time went on and urban legends started to take shape, a few things got lost over time. It's supposed to be one of the most haunted tunnels, in Tennessee. There are a couple of different tales. In one version of this legend, Edward led a homeless man into his home as an act of charity. Their guest tried to steal jewelry, and Edward confronted him with a gun. The thief grabbed Edward's baby to use as a shield and ran to the house. He got away and drowned the baby in the tunnel. In a second version of the tunnel, Edward Sensabaugh went mad and killed his entire family and threw their bodies into the tunnel. But in the third version, that some people claim is the most accurate, Edward Sensabaugh lived into his old age, not dying into the 1950s, and none of his children died of babies. But as Edward grew old, vandals and teens had taken to using the tunnel for their fun. Edward wasn't happy about it, so he would hide at the end of the tunnel and fill it with an eerie shriek, scaring off anyone hiding inside, thus beginning the legend of the Sensabaugh Tunnel. Legend has it, if you switch off your car engine in the middle of the tunnel, it won't switch back on. Some say you can hear the baby's cry and approaching footsteps of Edward himself. Some have even claimed that when driving through the tunnel, the shadow of a woman appears in your back seat. There are no pull-offs anywhere near, and locals don't like you stopping and blocking the road. So you probably can just see it as you drive by and make sure not to block the narrow road. One page said that the tunnel is surrounded by rumors of murder, death, and satanic rituals located in the U.S. state of Tennessee. It should be avoided at all costs. It is a place where demonic apparitions appear, car engines die, and the shrieks of eternally trapped women and babies echo. I couldn't find any more haunted tunnels in Tennessee. So, sorry, my friends from Tennessee, if I left any out. You can let me know. Next is Kentucky. Allendale Tunnel in Ellesmere Park, or Ellesmere, Kentucky. So this tunnel technically isn't Appalachia either, but it's close, so I'm putting it here. The Allendale Tunnel is located south of Cincinnati in the woods behind the Allendale Trailer Park in Ellesmere, Kentucky. Some years ago, legends say a man hung himself from a hook that is set above the tunnel entrance. Now his ghost is said to walk the tunnel, or some say appear still hanging from the hook. There are also reports of disembodied voices as well as screams coming from the tunnel. There is a hook above both entrances, so at least that part of the legend is true. But who knows if anyone hung themselves from either one. It's technically not a train tunnel, but a drainage tunnel. Next one is Nada Station Tunnel. I'm going to include this, what I had typed up before I found out. I said, I would think naturally this would be called Nada, like de Nada. But from what I know about the Appalachian area, is that towns are never pronounced the way you think there. So it's probably pronounced with a long A like Nada. And I looked it up, and it is. So Nada Tunnel. Formerly a railway tunnel, the tunnel has often been described as the gateway to the Red River Gorge, for the shortcut it provides motorists to the Red River Gorge canyons of the Daniel Boone National Forest. There's a local legend that the Nada Tunnel is haunted by a ghost of a former tunnel construction worker who perished when a stick of dynamite exploded when being thawed out in a nearby fire. Yeah, that's probably not a good way to thaw dynamite out. You should never use an open flame. So those are the only two tunnels I could find in Kentucky. So we're going to finish with Pennsylvania tunnels. Abandoned Sidling Tunnel. This is in Waterfall, Pennsylvania in Fulton County. It's on an old abandoned 13-mile section of the turnpike in Pennsylvania. So this one technically isn't a railroad tunnel, but it was actually also originally planned to be a railroad tunnel, and it switched to the turnpike. From a website I found it on said the old turnpike is on many people's bucket lists to visit, although few have the guts to take this forsaken post-apocalyptic looking road and follow it through an abandoned tunnel that is 1.3 miles long, pitch black in some places and just plain creepy. However, it's not enough that it appears isolated and friendless. There are things of supernatural too that lurk here. So I actually was considering doing a half marathon here. I'm recording this on Saturday, October 19th, and I think that's actually the day that it was supposed to be, on today. But I wanted to do it because you get to run through the abandoned tunnel. But I'm glad I didn't because supposedly there's a lot of ghosts there. So glad that I decided not to do this one. There's a ghostly girl who was killed in a car wreck who still lurks there in the confines of the tunnel. People toss pebbles inside and something will throw it back at them. And some have seen mysterious car lights from vehicles that have wrecked from the past. People have also witnessed a Wendigo-type creature who uses it as a lair. It is described as over 6 foot tall, gray, thin, and hunched over. So yeah, if I knew that, I definitely wouldn't have ran through the tunnel. I would have convinced myself that I'd seen all that stuff and more, probably. Next is Horseshoe Curve Tunnel in Altoona, Pennsylvania. From what I read, it's near Horseshoe Curve. I know, who would have known? But Horseshoe Curve is a bit of architectural wonder, the tunnel not so much. But it is supposedly haunted. Local lore hangs heavy at the Horseshoe Curve Tunnel in Altoona. But what exactly happened there remains somewhat murky. Legend states that an Irish woman has haunted the tunnel since the late 1800s. And what happened to this young lady is said to be wearing white dress is debatable. Many say she was lurking outside the tunnel on the Altoona side waiting for the return of her beloved after a day's work. In one version, a murderer prematurely and brutally ends her life, and her spirit remains in the dark, foreboding tunnel. Others assert that it was actually the Irish woman's beloved who met a tragic end, perhaps murdered on his way to meet her, and her spirit has lurked in the tunnel for decades, still awaiting her lover's return. Next is Green Man's Tunnel near Pittsburgh. I remember reading this story, or maybe I listened to a morbid podcast about this. I don't know, but this one's a bit familiar to me. The Green Man is said to have been an electrical worker who was in an accident that melted his face and killed him. His ghost has subsequently been seen near the site of the accident, which is thought to have occurred at one of Pennsylvania's abandoned railroad tunnels. He was also known as Charlie No-Face. Part of the story was true. Charlie No Face was a real man named Raven Robinson. Robinson was tragically disfigured when climbing some power lines as a boy, which left him with no eyes or nose. As he grew older, he took to taking midnight strolls to keep in shape and to keep out of view of some of the more cruel townsfolk. Unfortunately, this nocturnal wandering only served to add to the urban legend that was already building around him. Eventually, Robinson gained a small amount of notoriety, and people would bring him cigarettes and beer on his walks. A legend in his own time, even after his death, some say they still see him at the tunnel. So does he still hang out the tunnel? Maybe so. Maybe not. Who knows? And that's about all the haunted tunnels that I could find in the Appalachian region. There's probably a lot more, but those are the ones that I could find. So tell me, do you have any haunted tunnels that I didn't include on the list? Have you seen anything in any tunnels? And what is it that makes West Virginia so haunted? Like, what the Mothman's there, the Flatwood Monster. I'm going to do an upcoming thing on the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. West Virginia must just be a spooky place. But also, what makes tunnels haunted? I think it's the dark and the echoes. Easy to imagine ghosts in places like that. Also, underground is kind of an unknown. We don't spend a lot of time underground, so going through tunnels makes us all uneasy. Tunnels are a bit spooky, even I have to admit that. There's always a fear of it falling in, too. Or maybe tunnels are haunted. It's a nice dark place where spirits can hang out all day and all night. Does anyone else feel like uneasy going through tunnels? Is it just me? I don't know. I always feel weird going through tunnels. But anyways, that's the episode on tunnels. Thanks again for listening. I really do appreciate all the support. I know I say that a lot, but I just want you to know that I am truly grateful for all of you and appreciate every episode you listen to, every like you give me, everything. So thank you. You can follow me on social media under Poison Appalachia. I'm on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, well, X, I guess, is what it's called now. Facebook is my main thing. I'm on Instagram and Threads, but Facebook is definitely the best way to contact me, or contact me through my email, which is poisonappalachia@gmail.com. Thanks again, and I'll see y'all next week. Bye.